So yeah, as Sandra mentioned, I come from the entertainment industry. That's where I made my career during my 20s and early 30s. I'm almost 40 now.
Wow. Oh, God.
Yeah, here it comes.
Baby.
So I went from making entertainment to using new media technology to make a statement. Often I would film something in Prince William County at the Board of County Supervisors Chamber, and I'd have it on YouTube before the sun went down. And in that county, our YouTube channel, 9500 Liberty, became like C-SPAN, but at the local level. And it was something that ordinary citizens used to organize against a SB 1070 bill, a resolution that was briefly in place in Prince William County until the people came together, Republicans and Democrats, and repealed it after 8 weeks of implementation. And so that taught us some important lessons. And to apply it to this narrative war that we have between the people and the corporations in this country, I wanted to sort of hitch onto something Craig said about what President Obama is trying to decide when he looks at this executive order. And this, I think, points to the fact that we shouldn't look at this as a partisan issue if our Democratic president has to solve this equation. What should I fear more? Being voted out of office or being advertised out of office? That's what he's doing right now, trying to decide whether he's going to nominate Elizabeth Warren to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's what he's trying to decide right now with this executive order. I just want to do something that's kind of funny, just to loosen us up for the Q&A. On DCA Channel 20, when I was growing up in Burke, Virginia, was a show called WWF Professional Wrestling. It was on, I think it was 11 a.m. on Sundays, and I was hooked. So I'm a half-Asian, half-white kid growing up in Virginia, not long after the Supreme Court had struck down the anti-miscegenation laws. So there aren't a lot of interracial Asian kids around. There aren't a lot of interracial kids around at all, because I was born 5 years after the Loving versus Virginia decision. So for me, identity was a complex thing to construct, and professional wrestling was such a great guide as to who the good guys were and who the bad guys were in America. Right? Oh, of course the good guys were patriotic Americans. Okay? The bad guys were either Americans who were not patriotic and very self-centered and pretty vicious and sadistic, or they were foreigners, right? So I'm watching, and Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito are bad guys. Why? Because they're from Japan. Tiger Chun-Li is a bad guy. Why? Because he's from Korea. Killer Khan is a bad guy. Why? Because he's from Mongolia. The Samoans, guess why they're bad?
They're from Samoa.
So I'm watching this, and then there was this one character that really, really fascinated me. And the showrunner, Vince McMahon, realized this too. Even though he was a bad guy, Jimmy the Superfly Snuka was from Fiji. That's why he was bad. Actually, he was from Hawaii, which is my other boyhood home. Well, Jimmy the Superfly Snuka could jump off the top rope and land on another person and never miss. And he became very popular in spite of the fact that he was introduced to us, much like Kamala the Ugandan Giant. Kamala the Ugandan Giant was from Georgia. But anyway, he was introduced to the public on a commercial for another wrestling federation, NWA, where it's an African-American man who's 6'8", 320 pounds, wearing a loincloth and war paint, coming out of a jungle at the camera. And the caption says, "This will be the opponent for Jerry the King Lawler on Saturday," and they sold out the arena in minutes. Well, Jimmy the Superfly Snuka was introduced the same way. Although he's an American, they had him with this huge afro and bulging eyes, and he was unable to speak. And his white manager, Captain Lou Albano, would say that, this guy's going to kick your ass, but he could never speak. And he couldn't figure out his finances, and he was just basically a zoological specimen. Until Vince McMahon figured out if you could make him into a good guy, he could sell more tickets. So how do you make a foreigner into a good guy? Well, it was a story where Jimmy figured out that his manager was cheating him, and then his manager had him attacked. And then Ray the Crippler Stevens, who was an American, but he was a sadistic, self-centered guy, broke Jimmy the Superfly Snuka's neck. Okay, and so this is the story I'm watching as a 10-year-old. Vince McMahon, who plays the role as the journalist, okay, is talking to Gorilla Monsoon, who's the color man. And Vince McMahon says, "Gorilla Monsoon, what do you think about the fact that Ray the Crippler Stevens has broken Jimmy the Superfly Snuka's neck?" And then Gorilla Monsoon says, well, you know, Vince, I wrestled a lot of years, and I gotta tell you, when a man injures you in the ring, you bear a grudge against that man, and I can imagine that Jimmy's very angry right now. And then Vince said, Gorilla Monsoon, what do you think's gonna happen when Jimmy the Superfly Snuka's neck heals? And he comes back to fight Ray the Cripper Stevens at the Capitol Center on June 23rd, 1992. And Gorilla Monsoon says, I wrestled a lot of years, and I gotta tell you, if a man had broken my neck, and then my neck healed, and then I was gonna fight him at the Capitol Center on June 23rd, I think it would be one hell of a match, and you better pay $29.99 to see it. Now, would you tell stories that way if you owned the World Wrestling Federation, or if you had a YouTube channel, which is where we're going with this? Would you tell stories that way? Would you use good guys and bad guys that way, the Democrats and the Republicans, or the foreigners and the white patriotic Americans? In fairness, they were sometimes black and even Latino. But no, you wouldn't, right? Okay. And that brings me to the Supreme Court decision. Because I think that the Supreme Court decision was not just judicial activism, it was an ideological act of desperation to prevent a revolution that's already started. And that revolution is that with the democratization of media, we the people will become the storytellers, or at least we would have enough of a share of the media market that whatever they pay for, no matter how much they spend, no matter how much Paul Ryan's leadership spending is going to flow into our eyes through commercials and, you know, Fox News and all of that stuff, no matter how much leadership spending they use, we're not just sitting there with 3 networks with no role other than choosing among them. We're not just consumers of content now. We're producers of content. And the last 4.5 years of my life are proof of that. And every single one of you has a sphere of influence, a term I learned from Lowell. A sphere of influence through your email account, you might have Facebook, you might have Twitter. Anybody have any of those 3 things? Okay, that means you're all producers of content. That means you're all potential spreaders of content. That means that if we all learn to interlock our spheres of influence, we can rival leadership spending. We can rival corporate power. That's why Annabelle and I are experimenting now with the coffee party. By the way, as an aside, professional wrestling, news entertainment, and reality TV, have you noticed? And you know what? There's actually a character in that story who's been on all 3. Can anybody name him? Donald Trump. Before the path was cleared from reality TV directly to politics, he had to stop at professional wrestling. And he actually was on WrestleMania with Vince McMahon, the very same man who I mentioned, the fake reporter, whose wife just ran for Senate in Connecticut. So this is all one show. And you know what? We're getting tired of it. We are getting tired of it, and we're beginning to create our own show. And that's what the coffee party has been proving. So Annabelle puts this on Facebook, we should have a coffee party. And like before she even told me that she did this, people were creating coffee party chapters all over the United States because our previous projects have gotten Annabelle a lot of Facebook likes. So a few months later, here we are, and CNN is doing stories, and we're part of the show, right? Because the media likes to have 2 professional wrestlers who can, right? And so corporate media, the Koch brothers, Dick Armey had spent so much money constructing a stage for the Tea Party, but it wasn't really, you know, they didn't have a complete action figure set, right? Until the coffee party came along. So suddenly they were shoving us out on the stage, and we hadn't raised any money, we hadn't gone through any planning. It was a YouTube, basically a joke. But people are so hungry for something more authentic than Jimmy the Superfly Snuka versus Ray the Crippler Stevens, more authentic than Donald Trump versus Barack Obama, more authentic than, this might sound familiar, what do you think about the fact that Barack Obama was raised in a madrasa and wants the terrorists to win? Well, I studied politics for a lot of years, and I gotta tell you, the Democratic nominee for president was raised in a madrasa and wants the terrorists to win. very hard for voters to support that candidate. It's the same show. So Americans want something more authentic, and the web is where we can find it. So my main message to you is that these guys have the solutions, but none of that's going to really be possible unless we, the people, pool those spheres of influence and learn how to start winning this narrative war, which, you know what, we're winning the narrative war. We're beginning to turn the table, you know, as these guys mentioned, the election on Tuesday, what's happening in Wisconsin. So I think that we know what the narrative is, and the door is now open. It's no longer, give me your $30 million to buy a news channel, please, right? It's, do you care enough to learn these tools? Because, you know, posturist, I don't know it, but I took the time to learn these tools. Do you care enough to learn these tools to increase that sphere of influence wide enough to reach the next person, you know, who's in that same universe, and that person connects to the next one? And just to give you a little bit of hope, because of 9500 Liberty and a little bit of the Coffee Party, the way that I make my living is I speak up in colleges. And so I go around the country, especially in the spring and in the fall, and I meet young people who already know these tools. They don't have the knowledge that you have. They don't have the knowledge that these people can share with you, but they are digital natives. They know these tools. And so if we can find a way to start connecting those spheres in an authentic way, so it's really about people communicating, people sharing ideas, don't fall into the trap of it's the Democrats versus the Republicans, or it's the whites versus the Hispanics, or it's the conservatives versus the liberals, because that contributes to the other of the two big problems that the Coffee Party tries to address. The first one is corruption. We've talked a lot about the cycle of corruption, right? You have money for lobbying that writes laws, then money for advertising that creates that chilling effect, and then the policies that you get in return increase your profits, which then you can invest in that influence. That's what we call the cycle of corruption. Well, the other problem is disengagement. And one of the ways that we can address the problem of disengagement is new media, social media. And the other one is to just kind of take a step back. And, you know, Coffee Party talks a lot about civility, because that was one of the things that most offended us about the Tea Party, and also what happened in Prince William County right before that it was a deliberate toxification of civic discourse, so that people are illegals, you know, or so that people are socialists because of what they think, or because of the color of their skin. And what that does is, yeah, it does, you know, and people can do that from the left as well, it does kind of rile up a certain base, but what it also does is it really alienates the average person. It really makes the average person not want to participate in the political process. So I really believe that what March talked about, you know, in the last 30 years, that's about the same time that professional wrestling became journalism, became reality TV, the three pillars of news entertainment. That's about the same time when it merged, and I think that we need to not allow ourselves to get drawn into picking one of the professional wrestling characters, or picking one of the news channels, where the good guys and bad guys are, you know, they're basically characters in a story, aren't they? Right? You see them again and again. Well, if we find a way to engage in the political process, not necessarily by getting on one side of the fence and throwing stones or bricks at the other, but trying to remove that fence and having a dialogue that's based on facts and on wanting to transcend partisanship, then I think that that could be more attractive than the angry circus, the big show that I was making fun of before. Thank you.